By virtue of going out in the car now, I've missed 2 workshops about engines, which is amazing. Because, you know, I like a good engine as much as the next man, but workshop, I'm fine, thanks. Hi! Now you might have seen our Mazda 3 review last week, but if you didn't, I ended up saying that this is very good, right? Lovely cabin, dead refined, and it is great to drive. But also that if I was talking to somebody who's not that bothered about the B-road stuff, which let's face it is most car buyers, I'd tell them to go and look at a crossover. Well, what do you know, by pure quirk of timing, this week I find myself driving a car that, to all intents and purposes, is a crossover version of the 3. It's called the CX-30, and although it's a brand new model to Mazda, it's actually an extreme latecomer to the family crossover, I want to say party, but the family crossover segment is less a party and more a lunchtime leaving do for an extremely unpopular employee at an office that makes shelving brackets. It's roughly Nissan Qashqai sized. It has a 430 litre boot, which is exactly 72 litres bigger than the Mazda 3's. Although weirdly, despite one of my main criticisms of that car being that it feels a bit cramped in here, this thing is both shorter overall and has a smaller wheelbase. It's a lot taller though, naturally. Engines mimic those in the 3 as well, meaning a 1.8 litre diesel and a couple of petrols. One of them, the desperately underpowered 2 litre thing that I spent a lot of time criticising in the 3 review, but the other is a much more interesting compression ignition one called Skyactiv X, which hopefully I'm about to try. Unlike the 3, the CX-30 is available with an all-wheel drive system, although in most other ways, specification and stuff, it's going to be pretty much identical. Over to me in Germany. I'm just going to cut to the headline straight away and say that yes, this is a slightly fatter version of the Mazda 3, and it feels like that in pretty much every way. This is much more practical and very, very nearly as good to drive. Now, obviously, if you don't have the 3 as a reference point, that bit of information is completely useless. So what I would say to you is that early days, right, but I think this is the best family crossover to drive on the market now. I'll caveat that a bit. I've only driven it for a couple of hours and only in Germany. The roads are a lot better. They've planned out a route, and Mazda even did a bit of underhand cognitive priming by playing smooth jazz music all the way through the driving route. Could have turned it off like, but I was enjoying it. Wonderful. So why is it so good to drive then? Well, mainly it's because the body control is really good. It has body control more akin to a family hatchback than to an SUV, which means that it doesn't roll a lot around corners, it doesn't move around a lot on the brakes, and that gives you this feeling that it's steady and secure. But the good thing is, it does also have this general sense of comfort. Now, it is a bit firmer, ride quality-wise, than some people might like, and it can occasionally feel a little bit too juddery. And I do think that'll be more apparent in the UK, where the roads are quantifiably crap. But particularly if you get one on smaller wheels, I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think most people are going to find this really comfortable. Just enough extra give to make it that little bit smoother than the 3 feels, but again, without it being all like roly-poly. There are 2 other main problems that the 3 has, in my opinion, that this solves really well. The first one is general visibility. Naturally, you're going to get more visibility when you're sat this high up. But the 3 has a specific problem with over-the-shoulder visibility that this does quite a decent job of solving, mainly because it puts a little bit of glass in the pillar. Also, the A-pillars are quite thin, so front visibility is dead good. And yet, you don't feel like you're sat on top of the car. It still has the 3's really nice cosseted driving position. You do feel like you're sort of slightly set down into the car. That helps give you this sense that you're in control rather than being sat on top of a roly-poly SUV. Refinement's very good as well. A lot of crossovers suffer especially from wind noise, but this seems fine. And it has the same set of engines that the 3 has. I'll come back to that in a minute. Firstly, the other problem that this solves, and again, it's obvious by virtue of this being a bigger car, is that it just feels more spacious and is more practical. Okay, so bad stuff, and I realised that I'm banging on about the Mazda 3 as though you know what I'm talking about. It might be a good idea if you haven't watched my 3 review to watch that. But like that car, I think this car's real Achilles heel is the engine range. For some reason, Mazda is fervently sticking to this idea that they don't want to downsize and go into small capacity turbo engines like everybody else is. And for me, it just seems like corporate obstinance. Now, it becomes especially apparent when you drive the new Skyactiv X engine, which is going to come with the launch of this car around November, December time in the UK. Without going too far down the rabbit hole of the technology of this engine, it's effectively a petrol engine that uses diesel-style compression combustion. The idea being that you get the low-end torque characteristic and the fuel economy of a diesel, but you get the refinement and the reviness of the petrol. It's decent enough, right? But it's got 180 horsepower and it doesn't feel anywhere near that powerful. And if you didn't know that there was some really clever stuff going on under the bonnet, it would just feel like an average naturally aspirated petrol engine. If you compare it to Mazda's standard petrol engine, which is called Skyactiv G, but gas, then the Skyactiv X just feels like a different and more convoluted way of getting to the same place. It's kind of like finding out that somebody's handcrafted your Big Mac from scratch. Does it matter? It's still a Big Mac, it's just being made in a much more complicated way. So in actual fact, it's the diesel that becomes the most impressive engine in this car and the one that's most easy to recommend because it's got significantly more torque, more pulling power than both the petrols, much lower in the rev range, and therefore feels much more flexible and much more suited to the character of this car in particular. The specification is going to be the same as the Mazda 3, and if you compare like for like, you're looking at about a £2,000 to £3,000 premium. Now obviously that does put it into almost premium crossover territory, so you're talking like Tiguan, possibly Audi Q2 if you wanted to go a different way, certainly a lot more expensive than a Qashqai. Now what I would say is that that price, if you're just after a runaround, does feel expensive, that, but the feeling of quality and the refinement of this car does put it around that price. It does feel like you're getting what you're paying for. Everything's soft touch, everything feels really hefty and well engineered. It's just such a shame that they haven't got a decent petrol engine in here. They've got a clever petrol engine now, but not necessarily one that you're going to get excited about. Even the way the pedals feel and the way the gearbox feels is another example of just how well engineered this car has been. It feels like it's been engineered by people who just love to drive, and that's probably the most complimentary thing that you can say about it. Anybody who actually likes the feel of driving a car will really enjoy this, which for a crossover, having said that, if you're one of the probable majority of crossover customers who, I mean, I'm making assumptions here, who are less concerned about the driving dynamics and more just about it being easy to live with, practical and enjoyable in a fuss-free sort of a way, then I would say get an automatic. The automatic gearbox is really good. Pick a gearbox adjective, it applies. It's not jerky, it's smooth. It's not hesitant or reticent, it's decisive. This is why I should always have a script. Thanks for watching. Please let us know what you think below, and if you have any questions about this or anything really, do an ask in the comments section and I'll try my best to answer it as non-sarcastically as possible. Cheers, see you soon, bye. So if you want another example of how we get primed by the car companies, right? I'm just gonna take a drink out of my Mazda branded sparkling water bottle.